Yonda Pravishyamamavachimimam Prasuptam Sanjeevayadi Akhila Shakti Dhara Sudhamna Anyansha Hasta Charana Sravanatvagadim Prananamo Bhagavade Purushaya Dubhini Stapakaya Dharmasya Sarvadharmasya Rupini Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishna Te Namaha. It's a very important concept, this idea of self-surrender. Technically, it is called Sharanagati in popular spiritual vocabulary. It has got a technical name. It's called Prapatti in the Ramanuja system of philosophy. Ramanuja developed this Prapatti as a supreme spiritual ideal, though it's found in many other scriptures like Narada's Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, and elsewhere. And in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you find Sri Ramakrishna repeating this idea that without self-surrender, nothing will take place. And he gives the example of somebody rowing the boat around, and the boat is anchored to a pillar or maybe an anchor. Still, without untying the rope, somebody tried to move around, and in the morning he realizes that he has not made any progress. So now this idea, for the first time in our scriptural tradition, is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, the 18th chapter. The 66th verse is considered to be a great statement that underlies this psychology of self-surrender. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam saranam braja aham tva sarvapabebhyo mokshayishyami masucha. In the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna makes the statement. After teaching Arjuna Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and different forms of meditation, spiritual disciplines, finally, in the Charama Sloka, I mean the last concluding statement, in the 66th verse, Lord Krishna says, Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Saranam Vaja. Now, its literal English translation can be very, very misleading. Literally, it means you give up all your dharma and surrender yourself to me. That's a totally wrong statement if you take the literal meaning. But it has got a deep philosophical implications. Not only in Hinduism, in all spiritual traditions. So wherever man has turned to God, in any tradition for the matter, this is very, very significant. What is the meaning of dharma? Giving up all dharma. Dharma here means all of our own efforts. But after exhausting all our efforts, so in the commentaries by Ramanuja, and also the Tiga, the super commentary on Ramanuja's Gita Bhashya by Vedanta Deshiga, he says, after practicing all other yogas, karma yoga you practice, bhakti yoga you practice, performing a lot of rituals, prayers, meditations, readings, and so on, puja, maybe confessions, or any tradition. It's not just limited to Hindu tradition. In fact, if you ask me the question, outside Hinduism, where do you find the deepest and most profound concept of self-surrender? It is surprisingly in Russian mystical tradition, where they have this idea of ajaba, continuous chanting, silent repetition of sacred mantras, and so on. Now, the idea is you do your best, maybe for decades, puja, confessions, prayer, reading, and so on. And then you feel you cannot make further progress. It's come to a deadlock. You come to standstill. You feel totally helpless. Everything you do, but somehow doesn't seem to click. You feel every spiritual seeker will experience this dilemma in his spiritual life. After making enormous efforts, lot of hard work, sincere spiritual practices. Still, you find somehow things don't seem to add up, don't seem to produce the side effect. And then there is the last, that is Prapatya Saranagati. So Lord Krishna says, Arjuna, if you find yourself incapable of completely practicing karma yoga, bhakti yoga, any other disciplines, detachment, vairagya, and so on, then you do one thing, leave the whole thing to me. Just close the bargain. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna says the power of attorney. That it really worked in the case of Girisandra Ghosh. You know, all of you know the story of Girisandra Ghosh, a drunkard, an alcoholic, but very truthful, a man of strong integrity, but totally chaotic in his lifestyle. He said he can think of God even once in his life, in his full day. He said he expressed total helplessness, which is called karpanya, kripanasya bhava, means a feeling being total destitute. Then Sri Ramakrishna told him, give me the power of attorney. Suppose Sri Ramakrishna asked him at the very beginning, you give me a power of attorney, Giri Chandra Ghosh would not have taken it very seriously. Or Sri Ramakrishna told him, for example, you look here, you stop drinking tomorrow onwards. If Giri Chandra Ghosh was not a sincere person, not a man of integrity, he said, all right, fine. And next day he would have gone to the bar again and continued drinking. That also won't produce any effect. So on the one hand, total sincerity, and also a sense of total helplessness. But this total helplessness comes only after you have exhausted all your powers. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Lazy man, God won't care for him. So that's why Ramanuja has developed this into a very profound philosophy of self-surrender. The verse comes in Lakshmi Tantra, a well-known small little book related to Ramanuja philosophy, attributed to Vedanta Desika, who is the most prominent figure during the post-Ramanuja period. For those who are interested, I have given almost 28 lectures on Ramanuja's philosophy before the Stanford series, the foundational text of Indian philosophy, with the quotation from different canonical works. So Vedanta Desika says, and also in Lakshmi Tantra and Ramanuja's Saranagati Gadya, means a prose work on the concept of self-surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpaha pradikulyasya varjanam rakshasidi vishwasa goptrutva varanam tatha atma nikshepa karpanne shadvidha saranagati. 4 lines. These 4 lines give an outline of 6 important elements which constitute self-surrender. And the central theme is self-surrender itself, Atma Nikshepa. That's mentioned in the last line. And before that, the other 5 disciplines are mentioned. First of all, we must have a very positive outlook, a very positive approach to spirituality. I will only accept ideas which are helpful to me in practicing my faith. Pradikulyasya varjanam means the ability to practice a kind of indifference, not close acquaintance, no negative attitude. Suppose you happen to meet somebody who tells you, oh, don't worry about the Vedanta society is absolute superstition. Don't believe in God. Don't believe in meditation. If somebody tells you, and if you say, oh, that is true, then you will not, your convictions will be shaken. Your own faith will be shaken. Agnostic and atheist, nihilist people, nihilist people who may give us wrong and negative ideas, poisonous, toxic food. Then Ramanuja says, Pradikulyasya varjanam. Instinctively, you should be able to give up and totally be indifferent towards negative ideas. This is a most important second discipline. Anuvillisha Sankalpa means very positive attitude towards God, spirituality, and so on. And along with that, so we need a filtering mechanism. Our mind should develop a kind of filtering mechanism. Whenever negative ideas or ideas which are harmful to our life, our mind should be able to automatically filter out the trash and only accept what is essential. So these two important disciplines are very, very important for every person who is practicing self-surrender. Total sincerity, again, clinging to what is positive. So whenever somebody comes to us, well, it talks about spirituality, philosophy, or anything that is beyond the empirical, the worldly matters, we should have an inclination to discuss and enrich our own spiritual wealth, our own spiritual tendencies. Because association among devotees of God is a great help. And then equally, if not more important, is developing a mental filtering mechanism. What is that? Our mind should develop an automatic filtering mechanism which leaves out, which filters out all toxic, poisonous ideas coming from social media, coming from human resources, coming from print media, anything that shapes, that disturbs our own conviction, our own practice, that should be automatically filtered out. Second discipline. And third one is Rakshasaridi Vishwasa. It's a future sense. God will protect me. Well, those of you who belong to non-Hindu or a non-Vedantic tradition, you don't have to go too far. Just read the autobiographical writings of the Saint Teresa of Avila. And another very important source is the Way of a Pilgrim, that's from Russian mystical tradition, and St. John of the Cross. Anyone you take, automatically we develop a filtering mechanism which filters out all negative trash. And a strong faith, God will protect us. The Goptrutta Varanam Tatha. Gopta means protector. God is the one who protects. And then Karpanya, this is very important. The fifth one is, it's a very, that Kripanasya Bhavaha, there's a literal meaning. What it means is a sense of being totally helpless. It is not imbecility. It is not laziness. It is not cowardice. It is not a kind of inertia. People, you often find people telling you, I can't do anything. So you should look at him, look at her. If that person is sincere, he or she would have made her own or his own effort to practice spiritual disciplines. And then that devotee finds, well, my efforts are not enough. But this real conviction comes only when we have exhausted our own powers. And exhausting our own powers is a way of getting qualified for self-surrender. You cannot completely surrender yourself unless you feel yourself to be incapable of reaching your own goal. See, a glass should be empty. You can think of pouring milk into a glass, into a cup. Suppose the cup is already half full with water. You pour milk into that glass. It is half full with water and you pour. You get only 50% milk. Suppose the glass is empty completely and you pour milk 100%. So our own mind should be emptied. Mahatma Gandhi was asked a question by some Western journalist. What's the secret of your prayer meeting? He said, prayer is to be emptying of the mind. He was taking this idea from Jaina tradition, which actually not strictly theistic, but somewhat agnostic. So, but the idea is this. He was a devotee of Rama, but she believed that our own mind should be emptied our own glass should be empty. Then only if you pour milk, you get 100% pure milk. If it already has some stain, some dirt, filth, dirty water, then you won't get pure milk. So first of all, our own mind should be emptied. This condition is called karpanya, which is a central theme. In other disciplines are just what we call limbs. It has called anga, angi means the central theme and other 5 secondary details. This is the scriptural idea of self-surrender. Now, I can give some examples from our everyday life with the human civilization. You find something very interesting, and this is very well acknowledged by modern psychiatrists. Now, suppose you find a very brilliant artist, a musician, a painter, a writer, or you have seen these modern, ultra-modern intellectuals, long beard, disheveled hair. The trend began somewhere in the early 70s. Anti-establishment, they kind of counterculture, as they used to call it in modern times. Independent thinking, very sincere, very honest, very bold, but very unconventional, and being very proud of their unconventional attitudes. Now, and some of them were very, very brilliant, great artists. I remember, maybe personal anecdote, it may make the thing clear. When I was growing up, in the early days, going to school, we used to walk along the streets, the nearby school from my home. It's not far from my home. So we used to see groups of these hippies, long beard, disheveled hair, with some kind of a guitar, and huddled together in street corners, making some gesticulations to small little children walking the streets. In India, I'm talking. Small towns, not cities, but India. And small little children, maybe 6-year-old, 7-year-old, tiny kids walking back from the small, kindergarten and so. They used to throw little stones at them and run away. And these hippies used to make them gesticulations to humor them, to kind of comic shows and stuff. And when the children reached the school, the teacher told them, look here, there, don't do that. Why are you throwing stones? Little pebbles, they can't throw big stones. Why do you do that? They're all foreigners, they are all highly educated. They're called hippies, and some of them have very noble ideas. And they're running away from their country because the country wanted to fight with Vietnam, so they didn't want to do anything with this fight or against people who have done no harm to them. So you should never disrespect them. So school teachers used to advise little kids. Now, one important thing about this is, when you are very brilliant, very accomplished, and then you don't have any spiritual ideal to guide you, you are heading for trouble. That's why you find many great musicians, artists, highly accomplished people, when they do their best by giving a concert, or get writers like, but the classical example we can always quote is the great Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is supposed to be the greatest novelist of Western tradition, according to even great intellectuals of Europe, like Dr. Owen Williams and others. This man wrote all his great classics, Crime and Punishment, the Karamazov, Poor Fucking Gambler, The Idiot, so many, fully drunk. So, when you find that a very brilliant artist, novelist, musician, or anyone who accomplished a lot, even in business, It means they have exhausted their mind, that they have directed their mental, intellectual energies in one direction to very high level of perfection, to the peak of their powers. Then they fall with a thud to the ground. They hit the rock bottom. They don't have a cushion to protect their mind. And they take to alcoholism. It is an interesting phenomenon. There is a Sanskrit verse he supports this idea. Yepuman adimedhavi chaturnam ekam asnudi alpayu anabadhyova daridra patitopiva. What it means is a highly accomplished person, a great artist, musician, novelist, scientist, business tycoon, who have done wonderfully well, but absolutely no spiritual idea to direct their energies and their ambitions, but fully driven to achieving their own worldly goal, worldly fame, name and fame. What happens is their mind will be seeking a protective system. What they do is they take to alcoholism and drug addiction. That's why this particular verse tells you any highly accomplished person who doesn't have a spiritual ideal as a healing power on the mental system, they will either be short-lived, alpayahu, anabadhyava, or the family life will be a failure. They'll be very, very poor, or they will go insane. So some kind of abnormality is inevitable for a highly accomplished person without any higher ideal to guide their life. Because the mind is reached by the push the peak of its powers. So he became a musician. After the huge concert, they had to take refuge in alcohol or drugs. That's why every talented person, not only talented person, every person needs some kind of a mental cushion. When your mind is reached the peak of its perfection, it should not fall. It's like a free fall and hit the rock bottom. It should have a protective cushion so that you lead a normal life. That's why many of the great musicians, like Tyagaraja, for example. Tyagaraja was a man who was very, very poor, but he will sing only for God. You can find many great sayings. And this you find not necessarily in the life of great Indian musicians. Can you think of a man like the German musician Bach, who you call it? He was a very poor man, but his life was dedicated to the art of music. You may argue that he did not have a spiritual goal, but the point is, his own higher ideal was to reach perfection. I mean, he was not given to material pleasures and enjoyments. He did not feel the need to turn to material pleasures for giving a solace to his own mind, though he was a highly accomplished person. That's why every person in this world needs some kind of a spiritual idea. Now, in Hindu tradition, there are two words, bhakti and prapatti. In normal circumstances, you may develop this idea of devotion to God. So, as I mentioned earlier, Ramanuja says, when you have exhausted all your own efforts, then there is a hotline. And the hotline is self-surrender, Sharanagati and Prapatti. And remember, surprisingly, the most beautiful, the most moving devotional hymns written on this subject was Shankaracharya himself. In all his Saundarya Lahari, Ananda Lahari, Shivananda Lahari, Chatushashti Pujara Puja Stotram, and again Bhavani Ashtagam, Gadistum Tamega Bhavani. When I was in training center, I was in Bedum and I was teaching Shankara's Bhashya, Ramanuja Bhashya, and so on. So one youngster was singing bhajans in the morning, Bhavani Ashtakam, with harmonium and all that. Gadistum, Gadistum, Tumeka Bhavani. So in the evening session, the class, he was asking me why Shankaracharya was a great philosopher. He didn't care for bhakti. So I told him, you know, the devotional hymn you're playing this morning, it was written by Shankaracharya. You find. So Shankaracharya himself says the highest spiritual knowledge, Advaita, and the highest devotion, Prapatti, that the same at the experience level. For those who are interested, you can read this well-known verse in the Gita, the 13th chapter, 10th verse, or 10th or 11th, depends upon the versions, you know. Maicha aninya yogena bhakti avibhijarini vivikta desha sevitum anabhik jana samsati. The topic of discussion in this verse is Prapatti is self-surrender, devotion with self-surrender, the highest expression of devotion. He says, Shuddha na vibhijarana shila vibhijarini bhakti sacha jnanam. This highest devotion which expresses itself as self-surrender. You are totally capable of taking care of your own spiritual life. You surrender yourself to God. That itself is the highest knowledge at the experience level. As means they are different. We got to the goal, they are the same. So what happens to us when we practice this self-surrender is we feel that there is a higher power working behind us and with us. So many of the problems that we normally find it difficult to solve in the normal situations through our own efforts, our own spiritual disciplines, we find ourselves incapable of solving those problems. You find those problems just disappear. There cease to be problems. It's not that the problems vanish. What happens is when our own mind accumulates the spiritual power to a higher spiritual power, when we feel ourselves to be a tool in the hands of a far greater power than ourselves, then we become more powerful. So our problem becomes less powerful. The problem doesn't vanish. Spiritual practices, either devotion or self-surrender, it doesn't physically remove the problem. Old age, for example, people get worried about old age. Sickness, you have people suffering from cancer or any other problems. Do you think God will come and give you medicine and cure you? It doesn't happen. It's a very totally wrong concept. That is the spiritual psychology of Vedanta. Vedanta doesn't tell you that God comes from a hospital and solve your problem. What happens is when you pray, when you do self-surrender, our mind accumulates a special spiritual power. And that makes us more powerful spiritually. And when we become spiritually more powerful, we are able to look at the problem from a different perspective. The problem is no more a problem. Because no one can live for all time. Human life cannot be eternal. So the idea that old age, death, and disease are part of human existence, that fact is brought home when we do self-surrender. That means we become a tool in the hands of a higher power, especially in modern times, especially this age of this utilitarianism, where we judge everything in terms of its immediate effect and direct effect, tangible effect. We want to solve the problem immediately. We want the result immediately. We want it right now, today, this moment. So when we practice the spiritual disciplines, what happens is we get this idea, we get this conviction that everything in this world comes and goes. So we don't have to worry about a small little problem. It doesn't mean that we don't make our effort to solve the problem. We are able to look at the problem from a different perspective. Not only that, our own way of looking at problems will undergo a complete transformation. So there is a well-known verse in this connection. Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam haramiham Bandhavaisha viyogena brusham bhavad dukkhidaha tena dukkhena samtapto yadi mam na parityaje tam prasadam karishyami yad devairavi sudurlabha. Very, very famous Sanskrit verses comes from Bhakti literature. It's very interesting. How should we look at problems? And in what way this self-surrender, the ideal of self-surrender, helps us to look at life and problems from a different perspective. So this idea is put in the mouth of, let's say, Lord Krishna. He tells in the Bhagavad Purana, those whom I want to bless, I will make him isolated from all his friends and relatives and admirers. And I will turn him into a pauper. Still, if he continues to be my devotee, then I will elevate him to the highest spiritual level. He'll be an enemy, he'll be envied by even gods and goddesses. Literal translation, but it's got a deep implication. When we practice self-surrender, then we are able to look at normal situations and problems from a different perspective. Every problem is an opportunity for us to grow further in spiritual life. So, but again, this situation comes only to those who are highly advanced spiritual seekers. Just think of a man like Yam. Yam was one of the most wonderful devotees, householder devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. The one who wrote this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna by Yam Mahendranath Gupta. A highly accomplished person, kind of an intellectual celebrity in his town, Calcutta. And he had a very disturbed family life, huge family, didn't have enough money, lot of quarrels within the family. And one night, 10:30 at night, he leaves his home and his wife accompanies him based on he wanted to commit suicide. That was his intention. And he traveled in a hackney carriage, he traveled all over the city. Finally, he reached one of his friends' home, and the friend was not so happy to receive this strange man at the middle of night. When he had to leave the place, he went ahead and further he walked around. He traveled around the city. Finally, he reached his nephew's home, Siddheswara Majunda. He was living 2-3 miles away from the Dakshineswara temple where Sri Ramakrishna was living. And what happened after 2-3 days, this nephew took Yam to the Dakshineswara temple where Sri Ramakrishna was living. And he saw Sri Ramakrishna, and that was a very wonderful meeting. He left, and again he came back. That is the beginning of a new life for Yam. So the man who went to commit suicide got a new life. And eventually, he did the most marvelous thing. He is the author of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the one who went home, wrote in a diary whatever he heard from his master, and that became a great spiritual classic. You can imagine. Suppose Yam had a wonderful life, plenty of money, happy life, we would not have got a Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Just think of that. And later, Yam writes, his elaborate life is available in English. He writes that the problem that happened in his own family life was becoming the greatest blessing in his life, because it opened a new chapter in his own life. So sometimes you find, if you look back, you find behind every great event, there was one unpleasant event. Not necessarily, remember, you should not say, get away with the impression that every spiritual seeker needs a problem to begin spiritual life. Not at all. Absolutely no. What I mean to say, normally people face problems. The problems are not problems if we can turn them into opportunities. And if you understand this, that is God's way of testing our own ability and helping us grow in our own spiritual life. So this is a very interesting thing that happens. So that's why this idea comes in. Every great spiritual seeker as this ability to look at life from an entirely different perspective, from a non-utilitarian perspective. That is, life is a gift from God, and even when we feel that our own devotional disciplines, our own devotional practices do not bring the expected return, will not make us happy completely, there is one way you close the bargain. That is prapatti or self-surrender. And then you don't think about it. It is just one decision once for all. Suppose it's just like, suppose you pay $100 donation to this Vedanta center. And next day you go on asking what you do with the money I gave you. And every day you ask, I gave you $100 last week. Maybe after one, I gave you $100 last month. I want to know what you did with that. You rather have the money be returned to you. Thank God. Don't give him a donation. On the other hand, if you pay donation, forget that. So it is a self-surrender is something like that. Self-surrender is a one action event, totally different from bhakti sadhanas or devotional disciplines. In devotional disciplines, you practice every day. Devotion discipline, bhakti tradition, bhakti disciplines needs knowledge of scriptures. You need guidance from a teacher. And you have to work your own way. You have to practice certain disciplines with like the great punctuality, great honesty and sincerity. And then only you will feel the need for Sharanagati. But once you do Sharanagati, you're closing the bargain. You're silent from that moment onwards. You sincerely believe God is working behind you, working with you. Then you don't bargain further. That's a closing the bargain. That's an important aspect of the bhakti discipline. So there are many interesting aspects with regard to this. In the traditional self-surrender ideal, you find, for example, you have to get a teacher, you have to get, and then formally make some mantras. This is the Ramanuja system. Remember, when you read books on the Sharanagati ideal Ramanuja, it almost becomes a kind of a theology. That's the problem with every great spiritual ideal will face. When it becomes part of theology, then it becomes a very formal mechanical system. But in reality, Sharanagati happens in our own mind. It happens silently, it happens. When we find that our own powers are completely exhausted, we can't make any further move, we can't do any more than what we have already done, then this silent conviction dawns. It comes silently in our mind. Well, there is higher power that is behind me. That alone can help me to move further forward. At that time, this happens automatically. So there are two types of self-surrender. First one is, this happens automatically as a part of bhakti discipline, devotion sadhanas. You continuously practice for many, many years, spiritual disciplines, reading scriptures, meditation, prayers, and then finally the conviction comes to your mind, well, I can't do more than this. At that time, actually what happens is you really become a prapanna, somebody who has surrendered himself. The second one is beginning itself. So this idea comes from Bhagavad Gita. Just to give you a reference, later you can read. In the Dhyana Yoga, there is 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is asking one interesting question. Arjuna is asking the question, well, suppose somebody, after listening to Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, all other disciplines, Arjuna is putting forward a simple question. Suppose somebody dies away, something happens, he dies, before he has realized his spiritual goal, but he has been practicing, but not enough. Still, what happens? Does it mean that all his efforts are gone in vain? Or will they have any effect in his next life? Ayadi Sadhyo Pido Yoga Chalidamana Saka Prapi Yoga Samsiddhim Kam Gadim Krishna Gachari. This is how it goes on. What happens to somebody who passes away before he dies, and before he has achieved his spiritual goal? In answer to this, Krishna is giving a very important answer. What he says is, no, even a little bit of spiritual discipline you practice in this life. You have meditated only maybe a few times in one full life. You have not done much charity. You have not done much prayer. You have not done any service, much, very little. Still, whatever little you have done, it will be kept in your spiritual bank balance. I will be born again with this checkbook, which will tell you that that bank balance belongs to you. That spiritual bank balance of your own karmas, your own good actions, your own spiritual disciplines. Little bit you are done in this life. That will not be in vain. That will not go waste. You'll inherit this from previous life. Purvabhyasena tenaiva khriyadevi avashopi saka jijnasi yogasya sabda brahmadi vartade. It comes like that. What happens is tatradam buddhi samyogam labhade paurodehikam yatadi satadho bhuya samsiddho kurudantara. Comes 6th chapter. What he says is, by the strength of your own previous spiritual disciplines you have practiced, maybe in not last life, maybe 500 years ago, maybe 600 life cycles earlier, you have to think of this only keeping in mind this doctrine of law of karma and doctrine of reincarnation. So this idea from the Gita can be properly understood only if we keep in mind this Eastern belief in the doctrine of reincarnation and the doctrine of karma. For those of you who are students of history, you will know that this doctrine of reincarnation and law of karma were discussed in the first Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and Emperor Constantine rejected it outright. It was removed from the Christian theological tradition. That's what historians say, like Gibbon and others. It's a different story because it comes from the old Hebrew, Judeo-Hebrew tradition, Greek tradition, this idea of reincarnation and doctrine of law of karma, not only exclusively Eastern. Anyway, that's a different part. You can ask questions during interaction. The idea is this: whatever you do in one life, even little bit of spiritual disciplines, that will have its impact in your future life. Suppose you can practice self-surrender at the very beginning of the spiritual discipline in this life. What it means is you already done a lot of spiritual disciplines in previous life. On the strength of it, you are going ahead. Gita tells you, if you have done a lot of spiritual disciplines in previous life, then you are totally helpless because you will be forced to continue the spiritual journey in this life. Even if you try, well, I won't care, you'll be forced. Avasha means you'll be totally helpless. Suppose you want to know, I won't care for any of these things. You will have to care for these things because your system is rich with those spiritual samskaras, which you have accumulated in your previous life cycles, which take you forward in this life. You'll be helpless because you'll be forced to continue your spiritual journey. Think of Yam. Yam met Sri Ramakrishna for the first time in the examination. The man had decided to commit suicide. Highly accomplished person, but as thought he had a post-graduation degree, which he got maybe in 1862 or 63. Before that, he already had degree post-graduation. That's in 19th century, mind you. He was well versed in Sanskrit literature, in Christian theology. His understanding of Bible was prodigious, according to Vivekananda, according to some of his own Christian friends. Such a man, a highly accomplished person, and he was a big man in intellectual circles of the city. And one night he feels life is not worth living. And what happens? He met Sri Ramakrishna accidentally 3-4 days later. And then that's the beginning of a new life for him. But his own nephew who brought him to the Dakshineshwar, He didn't visit again many times, maybe once or twice. So he didn't bother. But for Yam, it was a new life. That's because Yam had already inherited these spiritual tendencies, samskaras, by his own disciplines he practiced in previous life. So he was helpless. He had to come. He felt like being drawn again to the Dakshineshwar. And that was the beginning of a great spiritual saga. A great saint was about to emerge from Yam. So what it means is, if a little bit of spiritual discipline will help us to continue a spiritual journey. You won't lose anything and you are never late. That is an important principle in spiritual discipline. And we can have interaction. I think interaction will be much better than this talk conversation.
Good morning, Swamiji. I have a question from our yesterday's session.
Yesterday's.
Yes. So could you please give us some examples of a karma yoga in day-to-day life to enhance our spirituality?
Oh, yeah. Karma yoga doesn't imply any specific kind of work. It implies an attitude towards whatever we do. The mind behind action is more important than action itself. So one may practice priestly work in a very secular way. One may do secular work in a very spiritual way. So the spiritual element in action is what is meant by yoga. So once you do whatever you do as karma yoga, then when the time comes we cannot do any more work. When karma drops, yoga remains. So whatever you do as karma yoga, it enriches our mind. It spiritually enriches our mind. And you can do karma yoga in your office, and also you can do your karma yoga in your home, in whatever job you do. The karma yoga always implies the yoga aspect behind karma, which means when karma is dropped, yoga remains. I can give the example, as you mentioned. There was a Swami who was Swami Ganananda, that's his name. He was the one who built a beautiful temple, Ramakrishna temple in Kaladi. He was a disciple of Virajananda, one of the earlier disciples of Virajananda. So apparently he was some kind of a workaholic, hyperactive. They didn't have many monks at that time, so he had to take care of the construction of the work. He had to supervise every bit of little bit details of the work that was going on. And if you have visited the ashrama at that time, maybe 1940s, you would have thought this Swami is more like some kind of a contractor, some kind of a supervisor. But then he built a temple and he developed the center. When he retired, he was so peaceful and happy. So I often am reminded of this statement: when karma drops, yoga remains. That's one test of finding out whether you are actually practicing karma yoga. Karma yoga has no room for bitterness because you are not doing anything for yourself and you are not looking for any result which you want to enjoy in a selfish manner. So along with total dedication, complete efficiency, enthusiasm, you're also able to practice a kind of detachment. It's something like this. For example, your huge weight, a big, let's say, box, suitcase is kept on your head, very heavy. You feel the burden, the weight. But suppose there is 1 millimeter gap between the hairline and the bottom of the box, then you won't feel the weight. So that the gap is yoga, detachment. You do everything almost like a workaholic, At the same time, you won't feel the weight of it. So that is detachment. Detachment doesn't mean a negative attitude. Detachment is God's work, not mine. So that attachment, which is it's my work, I'm doing for the time being, but actually it is God's work. Detachment. So you find the way you're doing it, people may think it's your work. It's you are fully obsessed, fully attached to it. But in your mind, you understand it's God's work. But you are totally free from the burden. That 1 millimeter gap between the hairline and the suit, the box, the heavy weight, that is detachment in a way, or it is of self-surrender, surrendering the results of your actions to God. So that is the technique. Anyone can practice. I cannot give a better example coming from San Francisco as I am. I cannot give a better example. Swami Tattwamayananda was wandering the Himalayas, the Tibetan region, 14,000 feet above sea level. He was wandering in rags, like a, disheveled hair, one not well dressed, wearing a Garua cloth, long beard, like a homeless person. No offense to homeless people, I respect them. So such a man was asked by Swamiji to come to San Francisco. And he came here. What he did, in 13 years, he built a new old temple, the first Hindu temple in Western world, outside Asian continent. He reorganized Vedanta Society of Northern California, San Francisco. He established a center in Concord. He started publication, a magazine. And not only that, he built and inaugurated, dedicated the temple in 1906, January 7. And in 3-4 months, there was a huge earthquake in San Francisco. And it destroyed a large part of the city and killed more than 3,000 people. And you were wandering from street to street, consoling people. And it was a big fire and earthquake. The strong winds brought the fire right close to the old temple. And at that moment, it took a different direction. And the old temple was one of the rare buildings that survived the earthquake. So just think of the transformation. For a man who had given up everything, an all-renouncing monk, a wanderer in the Himalayas, apparently anyone could have looked at him, would have thought he was an illiterate wanderer. But he was a well-educated person, fully accomplished, but given up everything. And then Vivekananda asked him to come to San Francisco. He transformed himself to a great kind of blending of the efficiency of a Bill Gates and the sense of detachment of a great sage. You can imagine. So that's an example of Karma Yoga. Did so much, but did not feel much about it. And one advantage of practicing Karma Yoga is it helps you to conserve your energy. Your body will be subject to fatigue because body is subject to the problems of 5 elements. You cannot have your body like a granite stone, but your mind will not be fatigued. Mind will remain fresh. Body, of course, will disappear. That's part of the system. So it's great. That's a great example of Karma Yoga. You will be able to conserve your energy. Your energy will not be wasted. Okay, thank you, Christy.
The question around spiritualizing the secular work, because that is where in our day-to-day life we spend most of our time, bulk of our time. And in today's world, maybe it was the same before, but more so today is in the corporate world, in the business structure, everybody is talking about your targets, numbers, goals, and everybody is measured by that. And people want to hear that from everybody who is in that responsible position. Now, we know that in Karma Yoga, we should not be thinking about the results. We should not be thinking about working for us. It should be just work for the sake of work itself. So how do we balance that while working in the corporate field or in the business structure?
I partly explained this to yesterday's session.
Yes,
Rajesh concept.
yes,
So at the beginning, you may draw a line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual.
correct.
Secular work in the office, university, hospital, and spiritual discipline, the shrine, the temple, or elsewhere. Well, at the beginning, there is this line of demarcation between worship, spiritual, and work, secular. And gradually, even work can be done as worship. And eventually, worship alone remain. So at the beginning, it's true. Actually, Lord Krishna himself addresses this problem in Gita. He says, at the beginning, you should not practice niskama karma. This is an important thing. Lord Krishna did not ask Arjuna to practice karma yoga at the beginning because Arjuna was so lazy. He says, karmendriyani samyamya ayaste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudhatma mithyachara sauchide. See, Lord Krishna calls you, you're a hypocrite. You're a self-deceiver and deceiving all of us. People read this Gita frequently without understanding meaning. They know Gita is wonderful. Sometimes Krishna uses very strong language. You don't want to be addressed in that language actually. Because Arjuna needed that medicine. Arjuna was a lazy man. And he was trying to talk the language of a Buddha, but he was a very, very ordinary person. So Krishna asked him, first you practice sakama karma. Give up your laziness, your imbecility, your self-deception, your tamoguna. Be active. Work with a strong ambition, with a strong motive. Be successful. Next stage is karma yoga. Karma yoga is not for the beginner. Na buddhi vedam janayeda jnanam karma sanginam. Those who are working hard with a goal in their mind for enjoying prestige, fame, name and fame, you should not suddenly ask them, you give up all that and work without any purpose. Totally wrong. See, Krishna was very realistic. Frequently, we often find preachers telling Krishna ask you, don't have any ambition, don't have any goal, everything God, like chanting the name of God. That's precisely not what Krishna taught. The first stage is work hard. See, remember, Klaibim Masma Gama Partha, neither to you Vavadyadi. The Klebasya Bhavaga, not a very, very respectable language, because Arjuna was deceiving himself and also giving a false justification. Suppose somebody very lazy, healthy man, educated man, your own home, suppose you are a relative, well educated, very healthy, very competent, he all the time is sleeping. And then you arrange a job for him, he said, no, I won't do any work. But he's asking every day, you give me $5. That is Arjuna's condition. He was steeped in ambition and desire. And he was also steeped in laziness and imbecility. So the first stage is to give up this laziness, do work yourself. If possible, to do something for accomplishing something good in this world. And then you remember, you tell him, whatever you achieve in this world won't last long. That's not enough. Because you may become a billionaire, a trillionaire. You may become the biggest, most famous man in the world. That may not give you any kind of lasting happiness, fulfillment, inner fulfillment, joy. It only, every happiness in terms of worldly achievement is only temporary absence of unhappiness. So to be really happy, you need something more than wealth and ambition and success. And for that, you have to practice karma yoga. So you should not you should not imagine that karma yoga implies lack of work, lack of worldly ambitions. You can be the most successful man in the world, but keep in mind this success is also non-lasting, transient. It is not, it is impermanent. I mean, it remains for some time, then it disappears. If you keep that in mind, then you have a wise man's attitude towards success, more intelligent attitude towards success, a much more intelligent attitude towards your own job and duty, knowing fully well that you may be the most successful, but that's not enough for spiritual fulfillment. So slowly you begin to do your secular work with a spiritual perspective. What is spiritual perspective? It is needed, but it is not lasting. Money, wealth, everything, health, everything is fine, but it's not everlasting. That is actually spiritual common sense. We actually link Advaita that we discuss maybe in the next session.
Pranam Maharaj. Is karma yoga and karma sannyas the same thing?
Yeah. Okay. Karma yoga takes you to karma sannyasa. Karma yoga is the means for karma sannyasa. So karma sannyasa technically means transcending karma. Karma yoga means doing your karma as a yoga or doing your karma with a sense of yoga. Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tiktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samattam yoga uchiti. Buddhi yukto jahadiha ube sukruta duskude tasma yogasya karmasi yoga karmasu kaushalam. So one is samatvam kaushalam. Two words are used here in these two verses. The Gita, the second chapter. So kaushala means efficiency. Efficiency doesn't mean technical efficiency, because many of the super efficient people also need 4 pills every day to get 2 hours sleep. Successful from a business perspective, ambitious, well accomplished, but they are not really enjoying their life, enjoying in a spiritual sense. That's because they have not taken care of the spiritual aspect of their mind or their life. They are focused only on the success aspect, material aspect of success. So efficiency here means doing your work to the best of your ability, at the same time doing it with a sense of what now we call detachment. So in the Gita itself, there is a well-known verse in the 3rd chapter, that is, which shows the difference between a normal person who is working hard for his success and a karma yogi who is also working hard for his success. Saktaha karmanya vidvam so vidha gurandi bharada kuryad vidwan tatha asaktaha chigishu loka sangriham. So 2 examples are given here. Let's say 2 brothers. One brother, he's fully attached. He's working hard, he's successful, but he's suffering from every kind of problems of success, problems of success, problems of abundance, as we call it. Very successful, very much advanced, but suffering from depression, anxiety, worries, etc., uncertainty, insecurity all the time. But very successful, very much attached, very ambitious. Mind is always worried about the results. That's one example. His brother, equally successful, same company, maybe a different company, same position, but he's calm and quiet. He also goes through the difficulties of body. He also falls sick, grows older. All that happens, but his mind is totally free from all these anxieties and worries. So yogi can work, succeed, and do wonderful things, mind remaining all the time calm and quiet, unaffected by the vagaries of anxieties and worries and depression. The other person, every minute is painful. But he watching at the computer line, the stock market's collapsing, his mind is also collapsing. And again, elation when the opposite happens. So he's a slave of his own mind, his own success. He's a slave of his own success, a helpless, a victim of his own success. So these are 2 approaches. One is you can be successful, like a Rajarshi yesterday we mentioned, but you have that deep spiritual attitude. Your mind remains calm and quiet and unaffected. You are working like a master, not as a slave. The other example is you are a victim, a helpless victim of your own success or your own achievement. That's the other action. Okay, thank you. I think it's almost time. One question.
Actually,
Yeah,
that
please,
is,
please.
my question is
Yeah.
just a little bit about this last question, this last answer that you gave with regards to being a slave to our minds.
Being a slave.
Being a
of mind.
victim to our own minds and anxieties. Does that affect somehow your intellect? Because I know there are different types of intellect, and some intellects are kind of like a rubber.
Intellect.
Yeah, you know, like a rubber where like for instance, sometimes I feel like when I read a book or I try to deeply read some scriptural texts, but the next day or even the next hour, I can't recall maybe most of what I read.
Yeah.
So it's not sticking. And so then I get into a kind of a depression, like, oh, what am I doing this for? I'm just going to surrender. I'm just going to pray to God. And so instead of focusing on that, knowledge and taking advantage of the spiritual power to help us.
That's true. So engaging in some kind of good activity will help you to make your mind more friendly towards yourself. Because I mentioned yesterday, the connection between mind and work is not very much understood. When our mind is disturbed, our work also is affected. But how the work that we do eventually will have an impact on how the mind works. That's not very well understood. So yesterday I mentioned this in Karma Yoga discussion. If we continuously continuously do some noble, unselfish activity, slowly you find our mind also begins to accumulate spiritual energy. Any kind of when reading good books, reading spiritually connected books. If you can't read scriptures all the time, you can read other great books. If, for example, read the Sermon on the Mount, you can read Henry Thoreau's Walden. Because you cannot call it a spiritually oriented book, but it's a book that takes you beyond the utilitarian concept of life. Because the utilitarian concept is what is actually creating havoc in modern times. Everything we do should have a direct, immediate result, tangible result. That's a problem. People may ask the question, what's the use of meditating? I don't see anything happening. That's true. But if you read some good book, you may feel attracted, but your mind also other samskaras which may not be helpful, which may not help you to concentrate on spiritual books. But if you do that, listen to great music. Not all kinds of music. Some music can be very problematic, but there are certainly great things in music, art, reading also. I give an example. We can't read a religious book all the time. Read some other books on mysticism, the stories of great personalities, things like that. Yeah, we are not able to remember because mind is not fully focused. Mind is not ready to read it. Our mind is not fully prepared and ready to read scriptures. That's why what we read in scriptures don't remain in the mind, vanish. But then, as I mentioned earlier, to begin with, I would say, if you cannot concentrate on Sermon on the Mount, you rather read Emerson and Thoreau, Whitman. There can be a bridge between spirituality and secular, ultra-secular, utilitarian concepts. It's very important. Okay, thank you.